we will sort of start out with, why would this guy, why is this strange man sitting up here talking about timelines? What is a timeline in essence? Or rather, from my point of view, as an individual that works with non-physical energy on a daily basis, what I find and what other people that work in this realm find is that at this stage of our human consciousness, our sort of energy, our frequency, what's being broadcast and sort of received by the human body has increased to such a staggering and unprecedented level that many of us are not aware of the level to which we are being influenced, the level to which we are being corralled or sort of guided into certain beliefs, programs, wavelengths, behaviors, outcomes. And so what's happening right now with respect to timelines, and if you're wondering what is an actual timeline, for those of you guys that are watching, the easiest way to describe it is it's sort of like a radio station. It's a radio station that the human body, your outlook, your emotions, your frequency will tune to. And it's a very simple kind of, way to describe it, but we find that when the human body, when the human consciousness is tuned to a certain wavelength, it begins to affect and change and alter our physical reality. And so when we talk about timelines, guys, for everyone that's watching, we're not talking about jumping in, like a DeLorean and going to, 1989. What we're talking about is tuning and sort of altering the human energy complex. So it's creating a new reality. And so right now, guys, we are at the stage in which, with the recent madness, especially with the, all the wild violence and the stuff that's going on, we are in a stage in which human consciousness on a mass level, just in these past few weeks, is being corralled, or it's sort of like an overlay that is being placed over us.
But she explained how we're gonna clear the negative timelines and shift into the higher optimal timeline. And that day on the way to work, I noticed a sign that I pass every day that says the name of the town, Gerald, and it's 5 miles away. And that sign said 6 miles, Gerald, 6 miles. It changed to 6, and it's been like that. And I've been looking for another sign that says 5, just in case I was mistaken. But it's like the weirdest thing ever. I swear, it used to say 5. But
that is a real thing.
Yeah.
That is a real experience. I can tell you myself, and for some of you out there, you're going to be like, whatever. But every single day almost these days, I will wake up and I'll walk outside, and it's like something is different. There's just, in some cases, you don't really even know what it is, but you'll be walking down the street and you're like, was this tree like that yesterday? Was that car like that? Was my car even like this yesterday? Did my face look like this yesterday? And those are all very extreme, kind of over-exaggerated examples, but we are living in an age in which, as human consciousness expands into this weird thing called fourth density, we're starting to move outside of the human body, where our consciousness is existing outside of this sort of physicality in such an amazing way that, in my opinion, it's almost on a daily basis. We're shifting our frequency. We're entering into new kind of wavelengths, and we will see little things like that. You'll see this sign that's like, man, I swear to God, it was always 5, and now it's 6, or whatever that may be. And those are those personal Mandela effects that, for some people, it's still a little bit of like, well, that's kind of some sci-fi there. That's a really cool idea. Sure, possibly. But there's also this other group of us that's literally feeling it and living it on a daily basis. So that's a really good example when you're shifting in frequency and all of a sudden there's a change. So one of the things, in my opinion, that we begin to experience during this fourth density shift is we start to come in contact with a future version of us. And it might be different for everyone. We're going to perceive this differently, but it's been my experience that for each individual who, what we may call a souled individual, and this is a can of worms, but not everyone existing on the earth plane has a soul, guys. Not every person you see in the world is actually a real person. I know that's hard. It's a kind of like a dangerous one to go down. But for those of us that are ensouled beings, things begin to change very, very rapidly. And I guess where I'm going with this, as we enter fourth density, these experiences and these timeline shifts and what are ultimately these abilities that we have to interact outside of the human the human body those are greatly expanding. And I talk about, or when we talk about the concept of background people, it is my understanding and my observation, number one, that each and every person at this stage of human consciousness evolution has the ability to begin to discern who or what is real, what is true or what is not. I call it the frequency of truth. It's if you want to get really weird, it's a module that will activate in the body after we've healed and sort of worked with certain filters or blockages or emotions. But the concept of the background people, or what some people call NPCs, non-playable characters, is based on the idea that, you know, every person that exists in the world, some of them are manifestations, some of them are projections, some of them are actually sort of programs, or in some cases, and yes, we're going down a weird road here, holographic kind of things that will show up in our experiential realm in order to create an emotion, to create a reaction, to sort of alter a pathway of like behavior. And so what we're finding is that upon realization or noticing, or even if you were to see a person out in the world and look at that person and go, could that be one of those quote unquote background people that Matthew and Tyler and everyone here is talking about, just by observing and noticing that individual in the world takes that background person program and instantly converts it into what you will perceive as a sentient being. And so just by placing our conscious awareness on the idea of the background person program, you yourself are actually turning that background program into a conscious sentient being. And so that goes back to the idea, you guys, and I realize this is a very dense can of worms we're unpacking here, but it goes back to the idea that ultimately you yourself are the true creator of your realm. And one of the, you know, by now everyone has heard this phrase, but one of the greatest secrets, or kind of like the mysteries, is that you yourself are creating and guiding that process. And so in our own internal space, this is my experience once again, many people we will encounter are not actually real. They're manifestations or like a projection of what's going on in your world. But some people will hear that, you guys, and they'll say, "What, Matthew, that's crazy. You're saying that you run into this guy at the mall and you're trying to tell me that person's not real?" Because that's crazy, right? People will hear that and go, "What?"
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about, guys. We're not saying that these aren't physical beings walking around in the world. What we're saying is that there are physical beings walking around in this world at this stage of this ascension and harvest that are just programs. They're programmed matrix bots. And, you know, they can be converted or things will change, or our consciousness will alter. And, you know, there's a million ways to look at this, and I'm going down a weird road here, but that's the way I perceive it. So as we go through this ascension process, you know, the layers, the third eye begins to open very gradually. And those are one of the ways in which you guys can gauge when this energy center is opening, because it's not like you get an additional layer of view. You begin to perceive the internal space differently. And so I hope that this sounds ultra simplistic. Some people get annoyed when I say this, but this is literally true for everyone that's watching. Whether you believe you can or you can't, you're absolutely right. When I first started doing this, and I'm just going to kind of rewind a little bit, because for everybody that's watching, like I would say in 2015, just 5 years ago, if you would have told me that in 2020, Matthew, you're going to be, you know, teaching people how to open up non-physical energy centers in their body for the purpose of increasing and manifesting, you know, multidimensional energy and intuitive abilities, I would have had no idea that that was going to happen. But what I discovered is that, first off, everyone has a certain skill. And I'm not saying that everyone out there is going to be creating fire in their hands and force lightning and all that stuff. Although that is within the realm of possibility for the human body, which is why we are so sought after by certain races, which is why we are so watched, so monitored, and so suppressed, because the human body, as we incarnate into this body, we will actually choose abilities. And for some of you guys out there, it is very much like choosing your character in a video game. But you will have chosen certain skills, certain abilities. They're going to be a little bit different from others. They'll be native to you, and they're going to activate at certain places or certain junction points in your life. But how do we activate those? they are going to be almost, well, I shouldn't say always, but very commonly just on the other side of the emotional influences, the emotional traumas, the programming that you received in early childhood, and especially early childhood trauma, whatever that may be. But for those that are trying to figure out, like, what is my frequency? What is my ability? Well, it's my opinion, first off, also that in 2020, you will already have some slight idea. You will have already sensed or felt or heard, or maybe you're one of those people, you guys, that's reading stuff on social media, and you'll read somebody's post and you just get this whole other, you're like, I don't know, I don't think that's what this person was really saying, or you get an additional layer. And so for each of us right now, we are already experiencing a little bit of that. Some of you guys are going to instantly, deactivate it when it comes in. But where does that lay in the body? It's a little bit different for each of us, but the modality, at least that I've been teaching and, developing, uses an auditory tone to open up certain areas. And so what we do, since it's different for each of us, is we just start in like particular zones, areas where we have emotion, and start to move energy through it. So we find that when we do that, people's lives have huge changes. It's like a corner just turns. And having had experienced that in my own life is absolutely real. But so to kind of summarize, you guys, what I'm rambling about is those intuitive abilities, those multidimensional kind of healing abilities that you're seeing other people use right now, these are native to everyone on the human plane, but they are just on the other side of personal healing and knowledge of self. But I had an experience in, I think it was June of 2015, before I was doing any of this stuff, in which, this woman was like, hey, I'm just going to give you like an energy blessing. Okay. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. I don't really want to go back to work at the moment. I was at some festival thing at work, but this woman just placed her hands on my head for about 30 seconds. And what happened is there's this sort of opening, or what I now understand to be an incredibly expanded crown chakra opening, that will take place when certain events, certain emotional things will go down, certain situations, what we might call a catalyzing event, will take place in the body or in our timeline. And so it sounds like for her, that was her catalyzing event. For me, what we would call the catalyzing or activational event occurred with the crown chakra. But a lot of us right now are also experiencing an additional phenomenon that I think occurs as we switch into fourth density. And this might even be you guys as well, but it's the concept of the walk-in, or the level to which, for those of you guys that are wondering, what is a walk-in? It is when another version of you, or in some cases, another consciousness, begins to integrate with the human body. And so that could have also been part of her experience. I know that was mine as well. But so the walk-in experience for a lot of us right now, like I just said, it'll happen at a certain stage in the life in which, through some predetermined agreement or some, series of events, it's as if another version of us. And for some people, this is very hard to grasp, so just, grab onto what you can. But there are events in which, at a certain stage in the human life, another version of you enters the human body. There is also kind of varying levels of that integration. And so by my understanding, this event that I had in June of 2015 was the beginning of what we call a soul braiding. And so, you can imagine just the visual representation of a braid, or multiple strands that are tied together. And for certain individuals, upon meeting certain like conditions or frequencies in the human body, we will experience this braiding, or what is even an unbraiding process. And for people that have seen that, it is more of a gradual kind of multi-level change, in which over a period of time, you begin to activate into an essentially different version of yourself. And so there's a lot of people having this right now. Some of us are leaving jobs, we're leaving relationships. I myself had to literally put everything on the curb that I owned and walk away from my marriage and the house and everything into a new stage of life. But for me, that was the soul braiding process. And I know we're going on a rant here, but for those of you guys that are wondering, what is that soul braid? Is it like another being that comes in? Because it's a pretty wild idea. What it is a different version of you that is able to activate and once again step into this physical realm through the container that we have created. And so probably a lot of like
something came in because, and she said it happened because I was in such a weak state emotionally that there was almost like a fracture in my being, in my
in your
aura.
auric field.
In my auric
Yeah.
field. And that's where it snuck in. And so after a few sessions, this thing, she couldn't just remove it after the first time. She had to, she goes, everything has to happen in the order it's supposed to happen. Like, you're out of alignment, this and this. So we just went through all this stuff, and she goes, when it's ready to be removed, we'll know. And I laid there, and I knew the time it was. And this thing, when she went to go remove it, I could physically feel it in my sacral chakra area running from her hands. Like, I could feel something inside me. And whatever even happened, it was almost like a blur, but she just removed this thing, and she was just like pulling it and cutting. I don't know what the hell she was doing. I left that place like a new person. I was on cloud nine. I felt physically lighter. And people are going to think that's crazy, but I experienced that. And
That is absolutely real.
Yeah, it was insane, and I had been carrying this thing around for years.
That is a really good real world, true experiential example of the phenomenon of, and once again, really wild term, guys, entity attachment. We could also say possession on a certain level, which is a very, very heavy term. Everybody hears that and they're like, what, you were possessed? The mind wanders in a number of directions, but possession in the what we would call the technical definition of the term is incredibly common now, but it also takes place on multiple different levels in the human body. And so what you talked about with the experience of your mother dying, that is an absolute real thing that will take place. Likewise, you also talked about your friend whose brother had died, and she had also had an experience, a different thing. But what happens is, for those of you guys that are wondering, how could this take place? How is that real? What about somebody dying would cause someone to open up on a certain level? And one of the ways you guys can imagine is, number one, there can be a fracturing process of what is usually the emotional body. Because one of the most prime sort of bait signals, or the actual scent that would draw it, whether it be parasitic infestation, sentient entity attachment, or even something else entirely into the body, the actual frequency that will attract it is usually negative emotions, pain emotions, what everyone calls loosh. And so, upon a very polarizing emotional event in your life, it's like there will be a crack. Or another way to look at it, you guys, is almost like a bonfire in a very, very dark forest that is raging out of control. And, there's some beings or animals in the forest that are going to go, well, let's go check out this fire, right? And imagine, some of them are going to come close and they're going to burn up instantly. They can't handle it. But then there's going to be others that are going to hang out around the periphery of that fire, and they're going to start throwing sticks and wood in there and branches. And what's that going to be affecting? The most prevalent negative emotion in your body. And so what will, in this case, it could have been rage, it could have been frustration, but whatever it is, that's how we find the sort of roots or the connection points to what in some cases will eventually become an actual possession, in which a being or a consciousness does take possession over the body. And if everybody out there wants to see what a real example of that looks like, I'm going to say it. Go look up, some of the people in the Democratic Party. Look up some of the number one elites in the world. And here's another thing, guys. Look very closely at their left eye.
Yeah.
That's going to be the place, absolutely, in which you're going to see not only the cloning element, which is a whole other can of worms, but what is actually a frequency of another consciousness. And so this is a real thing. But in your case, Tyler, that is a real energy clearing. When you walk out of that and you're like, something is different, and I know it, and that is a real clearing. Right. So I believe at this stage, this was a couple of days ago. For those of you guys that'll watch this in the future, what we're talking about is just the sort of riots and craziness that are taking place all over America at the point here in June of 2020. But I think this was about 4 days ago. Me and my wife, Honora, walked down. We just heard one of those protests. We saw the helicopters in our neighborhood, and I was like, what, really? And so we walked down to this area here in Los Angeles, and it was very much like we have been seeing on the videos and on all this stuff. While I did not find any pallets of bricks laid on the road, I was expecting them. But what we did find was a very, very distinct sort of display of what feels to be manufactured or influenced human emotions, something that is exacerbated or just exaggerated by what feels like a non-physical presence or a frequency. And all that other stuff aside, we did see, not people on people violence, but really just the level to which, you will watch this sort of mind virus take over in people, and they begin certain automatic actions. They will sort of buy into a feeling or a current, and you watch this sort of it's like a wave of collective madness. But anyway, it was a very, very interesting experience. I can tell you that I saw firsthand, everybody, those individuals with the black smashing windows and casually running away, and really just setting up literal opportunities for people that were being affected by this frequency to go, here's a thing, here's a brick, here's a golf club. There was a guy that drove up in the middle of the protest in like a Honda Civic. He even had his license plates out, so it's like everybody could record who it was. They opened up the trunk and they dumped out 3 golf clubs in the middle of the street. They just opened it up and dumped them out and pulled away. And it was like conscious attempts to seed human consciousness into violence. And on a certain level, this is where, I'm just going to go there. On a certain level, what you guys saw with the truck was actually a repeating timeline event from the 90s with an individual known as Reginald Denny. You guys are going to watch the repeating of certain timelines and events that are going to take place. Only this time the timeline played out a little bit differently with a different truck and a different individual, but you literally are watching a matrix replay of certain events. And so all that aside, take it however you want, but what is actually happening when that sort of feeding process or that feeding frenzy or that sort of frequency kicks in? First off, it's a really good example of the phenomenon of, once again, loosely held term possession. And so how would that take place in a groupthink scenario like that? What we're talking about is, in my opinion, an increase in this frequency, or what is also another virus, you guys, it's called the Wetiko. It's a mind virus. It's a frequency that gets shared and sort of reinforced between groups of people, between people in elitist power. It sort of trickles down through parasitic influence in large groups of individuals. And when we see that sort of feeding frenzy type of environment, or that stuff, or, the people going through the wild looting sort of hunger, and you'll see it on the news, they're going by the camera, and all we're seeing is eyes at this point, right? Because everybody's got those stupid masks on. And so you're just seeing their eyes, and there's this crazy, it's like this hunger. And so number one, that's an example of real world. That's the Wetiko mind virus. Once again, most easily visually noticed in the eyes or in human behavior. You'll even notice a tone of voice shift. But what happens is, it's kind of like on a collective level, a group of people will be tuned to like a radio station. Once again, because we were talking about timelines earlier, it's like consciousness will be tuned to a radio station. And when it reaches a critical mass, it's like all of a sudden we got all these beings in this area, and this critical mass of vibration, automatic influences kick in. And that's when, for many of us, we will experience what we could call a possession moment. But what it really is almost like an opening in the human body template, in which all of a sudden it'll get filled with this frequency or this energy, and you will act or do or behave on a completely different level. You guys will also see this with people with really big addictions, or people that are also, here's a weird one, super addicted to technology.
I'm just going to say that.
Yeah. What you're seeing right there is, in my opinion, once again, a real world example of this thing we call AI, biodigital social programming. It takes place on a number of different levels, but especially when we see that with children, what you're watching, internally, is this sort of dopamine release, this sort of hit that takes place. Other people will call it the casino effect that takes place in the body, in which, certain frequencies or wavelengths will be sort of altered to create a feeling in your body. And so, that is a real world example of that. In fact, everyone that's watching this video right now is also experiencing their own version of biosocial programming as well. But that is a real world example also, you guys, of how AI sentience, another weird can of worms, actually affects human consciousness. What's really happening in generality with that, everyone, is that there is an actual transhumanist timeline that, and this is a weird example, or a weird way to like think of it, but it's literally a stream that is speeding toward us in this like collective wavelength right now. And what's happening with, you know, the recent, I won't say the word, the injections that they wanted to give us to stop a fake virus, or the sort of new internet that's being turned on to further track and influence your emotions, what's happening is that's the timeline overlay process that's going to hopefully, on their end, the negative end, corral our consciousness into colliding with that rapidly speeding AI transhumanism timeline, which is why, you guys, we are seeing these last tentacles of this creature come over, you know, right at the end in 2020, right before we have this huge solar eclipse that's going to allow each of us to switch the timeline in our own way. We're experiencing the last gasps of that. And so it's just really important to stay aware of like our thoughts, because we're going to get further pulled into that AI kind of outlook. And you might be hearing some chaos outside my house right now, but yeah, that is a real thing. That's the transhumanism AI sentient frequency trying to integrate itself with our human consciousness. And so there is actually, for those of you guys that are watching this, there is a very tangible and distinct kind of protocol or things that you can do to begin to like either gain sovereign awareness or to ultimately detox the human body from this sort of influence. And so number one, everybody knows this at this stage, but it's the heavy metal detox. There is a literal phenomenon occurring where the heavy metal particulate matter actually creates a ring around the sides of your head. It will literally kind of begin to seed and flow into certain areas of your brain. What happens is those are some of the ways by which this sort of sentient AI frequency that we're already experiencing in our phones, you guys, although I think that's what they would call artificial narrow intelligence, in that it still works within a very narrow kind of wavelength or a band in which it's unable to completely integrate outside of that. But what we do is we begin detoxing the human body of heavy metals. And the reason why we do that is because that, number one, starts to release this sort of emotional toxicity from your upper chakras. It starts to kind of pull away the sort of influences or the level to which you are affected emotionally by artificial frequencies. From there, you know, after the detox process, my recommendation, or the thing that's worked for me, is Qigong or Tai Chi. What we're ultimately doing, you guys, is we're expanding and stretching open the non-physical wavelengths in the human body, namely, in my opinion, guys, the meridians at this stage of the journey. And for those of you out there who are, you know, able to wade through this weird, like, jumbled up thing that I'm telling you, in my opinion, the key toward restoring or ultimately removing this AI sentient influence and returning true clarity in the human body is, number one, learning the meridians. It's this literal circuitry that our human body has. And I think that's where a lot, through my point of view, of that density is hanging out. But it's also about healing our emotions. And I think those are the three things you can do. It's detoxing the body, improving your own energetic kind of like condition, and three, really working with our emotions. And so I would say for me, some of the most amazing experiences I have had, whether it has been, you know, some deep realization about myself and understanding of my mission, or even in certain cases, what I believe to be actual out-of-body extraterrestrial experiences, for me, they have been just on the other side of releasing this huge emotional bubble or this emotional wound in my body that I had been holding on to. And I think a lot of us out there at this stage of the journey, you know, like we're wondering, you know, how can I be in contact with, you know, the higher self or my guides or, you know, the ET guides. And a lot of us are kind of hanging out, waiting for things to change or waiting for things to happen or waiting for things to activate in the body. And in my experience, all of those things, and this is just Matthew's experience, other people are going to be like, it's totally different. But for me, all of those gifts, all of those frequencies, all of those experiences in Matthew's world were just on the other side of emotional healing, of knowledge of self, of, you know, learning about the mind, body, spirit complex, and, you know, who are we? What are we actually doing here? I guess what I'm saying is self-knowledge, healing, like forgiveness, all of those things for me are the keys and the sort of unlocking elements toward the next stage of the mission, I guess we could say. But I truly believe this is the most amazing time we could have ever chosen to come down here and do the human game. I mean, really, like we all made this agreement prior to coming in here. Okay, we're going down to Earth. What are we doing? We're doing this, you know, and then we get down in the human body. And just so you know, guys, you go through that birth-like canal. It's called the amnesia layer. So while you're in there, you will still have much of the knowledge and all of the things that you're going to do here. But part of our agreement is we go through that great forgetting. And, you know, you got to go through that entry point into the physical body. And like, here we are years down the road, guys. It's 2020. And we're having those meetings and those gatherings and those moments. And I think the reason why all this is happening right now, if you guys are watching this and you're like, but Matthew, the world's crazy and it's horrible and there's violence and, you know, there's this transhumanism timeline you guys are rambling about and there's all, you know, all this crazy stuff you guys have been talking about. We came here for that experience. It's just my opinion. We came here to experience this. And, you know, I realize I'm ranting on this at this stage, but I think if there's anything people take away from this moment or this interview or this experience and the stuff that people are talking about, it's that you are sharing energy on an entirely different level. And we are literally creating this realm with each other on a daily basis. So